Hello, my name is Una and welcome to this week's Granny's Garden. Now this week it's all about pruning Mahonia. On my property I have got 3 different Mahonias. This one here, one on the other side of the Nandina and one on the east side of the property. First of all we're going to be removing the sprouts. The sprouts shooting up really high, and as you know I like to keep my bushes around about the 2 to 2.5 metre at the very most. Second, we're going to give it some nice shape because this is a fan shape. It's a multi-trunk, it goes outwards, and it should be a fan shape with like a rounded top. And then we're going to sort out the problem down here of overcrowding and lack of growth. Now those are the 3 things we're going to be dealing with today, and the 3 of them are going to be resolved through correct pruning. First of all, I'd like to discuss the actual shrub itself. This is a larger Mahonia. There are some smaller varieties, but this one is the one that gets to be maybe 3 to 3.5 metres. Obviously, you can contain that height through pruning. Now, the Mahonia is best in shade or semi-shade, or even better in a woodland area where it's protected against these harsh wind that tends to dry out the leaves and gives it little scorch marks. It blooms when almost nothing else in the garden is blooming. In my garden it starts blooming maybe about the end of December, goes through all of January and even the beginning of February. So this is the very end of the garden, and from my house I can actually see it. My eyes are drawn towards the end of the garden. You get these big clusters of bright yellow flowers, and they are highly scented. Now you don't touch or deadhead these flowers. What you do is leave them, and these beautiful yellow flowers will turn into berries, and these berries are like a bluish purple. They grow in clusters, and that's why they call them the Oregon grape, because they actually, when they're full maturity and nice plump fruit, they look like a little bunch of grapes, and the birds love them. I get 2 types of birds that are just lining up waiting to eat these. The first are the starlings, which arrive right about the same time from Africa, and the second are my local blackbirds. They have 2 different techniques for eating them. The blackbird tends to be on the ground, and it sort of flies up, grabs one, and flies down again, and then eats it on the ground. And he keeps this up and down yo-yo style until he's had his fill. The second style is the actual starling. Now they use this plant as a helipad. They come in and they land on top of the cluster, which is quite sturdy. They walk until they find the beginning of the group of grapes, and then they walk down it, plucking grape by grape until they have stripped it completely bare. Now this shrub has got so many flowers that then transform into so much fruit that the birds can have their fill, and they're actually eating for several weeks. And just as the very last grape has gone, then the 3 cherry trees I've got in the garden take over and the birds transfer to the trees. Now the Mahonia are supposedly hardy from zones 7 through 9, but I garden in a zone 6 and get really cold here in winter with quite cold winds. But I believe that if you give it a bit of shelter, you can really lower that zone, definitely to a zone 6 and possibly even lower, possibly even a zone 5. But it is important to give it that shelter, especially from those winter winds or those hot summer winds. I've got mine more like a woodland setting. I've got the Nandina here, I've got the prunus tree above, and it's also backed by abelia. So it is quite protected, and I believe that's why you can take it down even 2 zones below what they're actually saying in the books. So, as usual, experiment and push your limits. One of the good things about Mahonia is they can take quite a severe pruning. So I've come into this property, I've got a mature specimen and it's leggy. What I could do, or what I could have done, would be to have taken the plant right down to about 12 to 16 inches above ground and do a rejuvenation pruning. So why didn't I do it? Well, basically because I like to attract wildlife. And for me, this is such a source of food for the birds, especially it's the first fruit that appears in my garden. Later there's the cherries, and later there's the figs, but it's the very first fruit that appears, and it's also the first flower that appears in my garden for those honeybees. How do I go about feeding the birds and resolve my legginess? Well, we're going to be doing some selective pruning, part this year and part next year, and then by the 2nd year the problem will be completely resolved. So let's get started. The next thing we need to talk about is protective clothing. These leaves, which are quite leathery, like a holly bush, are really prickly. Even when they've fallen on the ground, they remain prickly for months. When you're working with the Mahonia, gloves, not thin little gloves, but quite thick gloves, so that when you're handling the leaves, you don't get hurt. Now, ideally, you should be wearing long-sleeved shirt, but there is no way in this heat, with the heat in the 90s, that I'm going to be wearing a long-sleeved shirt. I'm just pulling back from the plant here so you can see it. Here's the leggy legs. There is the rounded shape that I want to keep. And you'll see these sprouts, you see, that are getting a bit out of hand. These sprouts are telling me that that particular branch is very vigorous. So what I'm going to do is follow this branch down, and I'm going to cut it to 12 inches above the ground. It's vigorous enough to get this sprout on the top. That means that when I cut it down, that just below where I cut it, it's going to start producing fresh growth. This is one of the sprouts. Be careful where you put your hands. Now I'm just going to pull it out to the side so you can see it. I can see that it's already beginning to get some growth. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it down just above this leaf here. And there's loads of these little bumps in the stem that's indicating to me that this could start fresh growth right from the bottom, which is exactly what I want to do. I'll be doing the same with this one. However, here there's a severe case of overcrowding. So what I'll be doing here is, again, taking some of the more vigorous sprouts, especially the ones towards the outside, cutting them down. Say here I'd cut down to above this little bump here. So this will get nice new growth. And then some of the interior ones, these smaller little flimsy ones, what I'm going to do is go right down and take them down to the actual base, or take them down to ground level, or as close to ground level as I can at this moment. And leave quite a bit of open air circulation so the light can get through and it can start growing fresh new growth without any overcrowding. Now, the next thing you need are the tools. First thing you need is a decent kneeling pad, preferably one that's long enough to take your entire leg when you're kneeling. This is an evergreen shrub, but as it grows new leaves, it sheds the old ones. The old ones fall to the ground, become very brittle, but they're still very, very prickly, intense prickly. So you need to protect yourself. Also, as you know, when you start pruning, the first thing you do is you sterilize your equipment. So I've got my bleach mix, which if you remember from one of my videos, pruning the spirea, I use a 9:1, or you can use stronger, 1:4. So you either use 10% or 25%. You just spray it on and leave it to air dry. Then in my case, glasses on to see what I'm doing, and let's get started. If you see here, I've got a main branch here, which is nice and sturdy, and it's actually got a side shoot, and this side shoot is doing absolutely nothing until it gets up here. So I'm going to remove this entire side. Well, as you've seen, first of all I removed the side shoot to about this distance so I could actually see what I was doing, and then made a second cut as close to the main trunk as possible. Now I want you to have a look at this branch. Now this is got a trunk that suddenly divides into 3 different sections. Now, the section here on the left is going out towards the outside of the shrub, and that's fine. The one at the back is heading off towards the back, again, exterior, so that's fine. This one, however, is aimed right towards the interior of the shrub and is causing some overcrowding and rubbing further up. So what I need to do now is take that down as far as I can towards the trunk base and take it out. There are 2 branches here, they've got a separation down here, but as you go further up the trunk, you can see here, as you go further up the trunk, that they're actually crossing and rubbing. You can still separate them, and if I separate them like that, there's already scrape marks there, so this branch needs to come out. So again, I'm going to follow this one completely down, and I'm going to take this one down to ground level because I do not want this one re-sprouting and having the same thing happen all over again. So this one is going to go down to ground level. I will not be using it to create new growth from below. Right, unfortunately loppers aren't going to hack it here, because with the lopping shears you need to be able to open it really wide before the actual mouth can get around the branch. So out comes the next tool, the good old little saw. I'm just going to separate this now. Get the little teeth in and we'll take it down. And there it is, the offending branch. Well, that's the underneath dealt with. Now what I want to do with the secateurs is just remove some of these over-enthusiastic teenagers so I can get the nice rounded shape and have none of these gangly elements sticking up. Well, that's basically it. As you can see, I'm now getting quite hot and sweaty because the temperature is beginning to climb. In the cool of the evening now, I'll come back and finish out the other two and dispose of the vegetation I've got in the ground. But basically, that's all there is to it. Just remember, Mahonia, you can prune aggressively. You can prune really at any time you want in the year. There is just one thing though, if you have done any heavy pruning like I have done here, it's mid-August now and it's still the end of August and it's September and it's October. And I'll begin to get that first frost in the beginning of November. Although I've still got 2.5 months, that first winter after you've done some severe pruning, help it along just a little bit. Just mulch up a bit the roots. Just give it a bit of a blanket that first winter after the severe pruning. But nothing else. They really are low maintenance and they certainly provide a lot of winter interest to the garden and certainly provide a lot of food for the birds. All important, especially at the time of year when there's nothing else going. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, do give it a thumbs up as usual. Subscribe to the channel if you want to join me here every Friday with my problem garden. And from me, Una, from my channel Granny's Garden, it's bye from me and see you next Friday. Bye bye now.